Hi everybody, welcome back to the latest edition of The Jump Show. It's episode 3. We've had 2 episodes of handicappers to follow, and we are counting down to the season proper with the 2024-2025 season preview here on The Jump Show. Myself, Jake and Dan, as always. Before we start, you can find us on X, Instagram, and now on TikTok. Jake is very much the man behind the technology, so thanks to him for doing that. There's loads of places to find us now, so if you're bored at home, simply come on one of those social media websites and enter in The Jump Show. As always, the 2 boys alongside me are Jake and Dan, 2 shrewdies, 2 judges of horseflesh. And we're getting closer to actually seeing some horseflesh with only a couple of weeks away now to the jump season proper. And Jake, once again, you've been doing great things. We're now on TikTok. Who'd have thought it?
I know. It's advanced technology, isn't it, for you, Bully? Yeah, looking forward to the season. Can't wait to get going. Obviously, Chepstow's just around the corner, and we will be having a preview for that next week. So look forward for that.
Yeah, absolutely. As soon as the Silver Trophy card is present, we know that the jumps is really around the corner. Dan, how excited are you? You must be getting the shivers down the spine at this time of year.
Well, again, we get to the start of the season, and a lot of the work in terms of horses to follow. I mean, the Winless Ones to Watch series I've been doing all summer, that's all done. So now the pressure is on them and me to perform. So it does start to realize, oh, actually, we're going to have to start delivering some results soon. It can't all just be talk. But no, it's going to be good to have it back properly. I mean, the weather is now appropriate for it. It's raining everywhere. We're getting Newton Abbot abandoned. So it really does feel like the jumps is upon us.
Yeah. Before we start the video, this season we are pleased to announce that we are going to be working alongside Unibet Racing.
Yeah, this relationship will allow us to provide you with ticket giveaways, bring you content from Unibet ambassadors such as Nico de Boinville and Nikki Henderson, and there'll even be some exclusive The Jump Show content from stable yards and the racecourse themselves.
And I think between all 3 of us, we're all very much of the opinion that we wanted a relationship that enabled us to have and not hinder what we've been doing previously. You guys watching these videos means an awful lot to us, and we didn't want anything that potentially could hinder what we're producing. And in fact, this relationship, I think we're all in very much agreement, is only going to elevate what we're doing in terms of these videos. So I think it really is going to be a win-win situation for everyone involved.
And with that in mind, this week we have 2 tickets to give away for the Saturday of Chepstow Unibet Jumps season opener meeting, a really cracking day of action, and it's a great prize to get involved with. If you want to enter, all you have to do is like this video and subscribe to The Jump Show and comment, "Jumps are back."
The lucky winner will be selected at random and announced on next week's Chepstow Unibet Jump Season Opener preview video.
Good luck to all of you who enter. I would be there myself. It literally wasn't on the other side of the country to me, but always a great meeting. We know the proper jumps racing is back when we get Chepstow, and hopefully the weather is kind to you, although knowing what it's usually like, you probably will need to bring a waterproof jacket. But without any further ado, let's crack on with the season preview.
Right, there have been some big changes to the Cheltenham Festival this season following the Jockey Club review. The full list will be displayed on screen in front of you, but we want to talk about the impact, really, of the changes rather than just telling you the changes themselves. And of course, there's been a fair bit of bluster about this, plenty of opinions on social media surrounding what have been some fairly dramatic changes. Jake, come to you. What's your general opinion on them?
Yeah, it's good to see some change. Obviously, we touched on this in our Cheltenham review, didn't we? How we wanted some kind of change. We've got that. I want to touch on the novice hurdlers first, because I think they are a group of horses that have obviously been impacted quite a bit by the changes. I think for the mares, it's absolutely fantastic that the mares novice hurdle will no longer carry the penalty. I think that's a brilliant change. Obviously, we saw with Dysart Enos last year. You know, Fergal didn't want to run her in any class ones, and she didn't. So she skipped the whole mares novice hurdle program in favour of not picking up a penalty. And then obviously, you know, she got unlucky and didn't get to run on the day. But either way, you know, we should have been seeing the likes of Newbury, Taunton, etc., and, you know, winning these listed races. So it's a good thing for that, good thing for competition throughout the season. But in terms of geldings, I think they've probably been the group hard done by the most out of all of them. Obviously, it's great that they've still got the grade 1 option over 2, 2.5 and 3. I think that's a good thing. I think it's good that you know, they've got those options. But if you're a horse rated 130 to 140, you know, just not quite that grade 1 novice standard, you're now being expected to run 5 times, you know, before you can run in a handicap hurdle at the festival. And I think that's just not feasible. You know, if you're looking at having 30 days between runs, then you'd be starting in October and running all the way, once a month through to February before you can run at, the festival in March. And you're expecting these horses to run the race of their life at the festival after that. It's just not going to happen, is it? So I think a probable solution here would be, for the Martin Pipe to be a novices handicap hurdle, just to allow that option for those novices that, might have 4 runs by the time they get to Cheltenham and have nowhere to go. So yeah, I think they've been hard done by, but overall with the mares, it is a good move.
Okay, yeah, interesting points there, Jake, on the novices for sure, novice hurdlers. Dan, come to you. You said that when we were talking about off air, you had a kind of general overarching opinion on the whole thing. What do you make of the changes in general?
Yeah, I mean, I like Jake. I think we had touched on this, and I think changes were desperately needed after last year. I mean, even when Cheltenham kind of have to hold their hands up and say, look, figures are down, people's interest is generally waning, changes were needed. So fair play to them. Obviously, we can throw a lot of stones at the Jockey Club and the powers that be for almost sitting on their hands, but at least they've gone out and attempted to make some changes. My fundamental opinion remains similar to what it was at the end of last season, in that I don't think you'll ever be able to enact the changes necessary by sticking to 4 days and 7 races. I just don't think it's feasible. I think at this stage, you're just kind of creating potentially new problems down the line. I think some of the changes are positive ones. Obviously, the mayor's novice hurdle, I think everyone can get on board with. Others, I think, are going to have unintended consequences down the line as well. I just don't fundamentally think that by sticking to this rigid structure of 4 days and 7 races, that you can have the competitive racing that Cheltenham probably needs. It's just not possible unless you can spawn about 150 high quality horses out of thin air, which is just not going to happen. I think that we've now got a situation where novice handicap chasers, obviously, especially amongst the staying ranks, have a choice of 3 races across 3 days. And then if they don't fancy running in either the new National Hunt Chase, the Kim Muir, or the Ultima, they can end up running in the Midlands National on the Saturday. I mean, that is just farcical race planning. It shouldn't be happening, and obviously has the potential to allow for a more plot style for the novice chasers, as we've seen in the past anyway. I just don't think that makes any sense while we have some races like potentially the Mayor's Chase. The National Hunt Chase now is a farcical affair. I think they've literally just kept that in because it's been a race that's been going on so long, but it's almost had the life stripped away from it. In fact, obviously, it's no longer restricted to amateur jockeys. I think there's going to be probably more unintended consequences than they intended from this, and I don't think it's going to be the really fix the issues that they're having. I think the most significant changes they're probably making are the ones away from the actual horses running themselves. Obviously, they are taking some initiative to look at pricing and look at transport and accommodation. I think those are all positive steps in the right direction. I think we won't really be able to see the real effect of that until after maybe 1 or 2 years, once it's had time to settle in. But I mean, you talk to a lot of people, say like my stepdad, for example, I think is a great example of this. Someone who used to go to Cheltenham year in, year out, went for 20 odd years, felt in recent years he's been priced out of it, and that they weren't really offering a product that was worth coming back for. I think they've lost a lot of people in that kind of demographic, and I think it's going to take more than a few race changes, a few more handicaps being added to get those people back.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, actually, Dan. You're absolutely right. It's going to take a lot to bring that sort of demographic and generation back to the racecourse for sure. I think they've almost been tainted for life in a way. At the same time, I do think a couple of changes that need to be made have happened. The Turners, I think, was always going to be vulnerable given what happened last year and so many horses that just spread out when they should be taking each other on. So with that in mind, I think it's good. Interesting thoughts, I thought, from Michael O'Leary about the cross-country chase. And he was very much of the opinion that they shouldn't have obviously put it back to a handicap because he's made hay in the last few years with some of his horses, including Delta Work and Tiger Roll. I actually kind of agree with him on the cross country. I remember when it was a handicap before it became a conditions race, obviously not that long ago. And the reason it became a conditions race partly was because the handicap was just not particularly entrancing and enjoyable to watch as a National Hunt racing fan, because it was full of pretty low grade horses who were all kind of, coming together at the end of the season and seeing what they could do with the cross country. Whereas as soon as you got these top class horses, and actually, I think it captured the public's imagination a lot more. So I'm a little bit worried for the cross country now. It's back to a handicap, and I don't know if it's going to be quite the same feeling and kind of race to watch really as it was a conditions race. But really, that's my only thought on it. I'm with you, Dan. I think whatever we can do outside of the racing to draw people in is going to be a massive help, and hopefully we can. And I think changes are going to have to be made continuously over the next few years. But I think it's a good start. There's no doubt about that. And at least, Jake, the changes have come in, and we are going to see some alterations, because if there'd been nothing, I think everyone would have been tearing their hair out.
Yeah, absolutely. As you said, we all know changes needed. We've got some changes. Let's see how they go. I'm skeptical, like down on a few of them. I think in terms of novice chasers as well, the Turner's turning into a handicap is great. You don't really want to see grade ones being downgraded, but it does, open up options. My only question on that is Grey Dawning, who won it last year. He was rated 144 before he went to Warwick and won the Hampton Court Novices Chase. Would he have gone there if he was on a mark of 144 and the Turner's a handicap? I'm not sure. So are we going to be taken away from races, building up to Cheltenham as well? That could be a possible concern, but we'll have to see how it all goes.
See, a lot of talk about the novice handicap chase coming back, a lot of people loving. I said quite adamantly a couple of years ago to a lot of decry that I did not want to see that race back because I think it did detract from other races. And then we're now going to have on the Thursday, assuming the schedule doesn't change, 2 handicaps over 2.5 miles. How do you get to the peak meeting of the season and have 2 identical near enough races? And you're only going to take the more likely winners away from the plate by having them probably running the novice handicap. Or how is the prize money going to be distributed? Are they still going to run in the plate anyway? Like that, it just doesn't make any sense to me. Like it's the same with having all these staying handicaps within the same vicinity with very similar conditions. It just keeps going backwards and forwards, and it doesn't seem to make any sense. But yeah, as we say, we'll have to see what the impact of these changes are. I do think with the novice hurdlers having to run more, we may see some boosts to these sort of middling grade 2s we often get around December, January, February. We see pretty small fields, very uncompetitive. I think with it almost added incentive to run a bit more, we may make those a bit more competitive. And I think that change has been done obviously mainly because of the Martin Piper, the county hurdle, and I actually looked at the last 10 years to see the percentage of runners and winners and placed horses that wouldn't now be eligible. And unsurprisingly, the Martin Pipe is the king of that. So 40% of horses who won or placed in the last 10 years would not now be eligible for the race at all, which is pretty staggering when you think about it, given that they're probably going to be a relatively small percentage of the sample as well. So unsurprising really that they've tried to target that, but is it going to be sufficient? Are they just going to go elsewhere? Time will tell.
Yeah, looking forward particularly to seeing Willie Mullins and Gordon Elliott and Paul Nicholls having a couple of novice chases over 2.5 miles, running toilets in grade 1s and 2s and suddenly sprouting wings in the novice handicap at the Cheltenham Festival. That's I think something we can all agree that's going to happen. Okay, those are the changes that have been made to the Cheltenham Festival. I'm sure the conjecture will rumble on and on over the next few months. Let's move on to something slightly different, shall we? And Jake Price has been doing some analysis of the sales.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. So this is going to be my usual sales analysis that I do year on year. Now, just to clarify for anyone who hasn't listened before, these are all public auctions between the months of October 2023 till today's date of the 1st of October 2024. So any public auction that has taken place, these horses will be included. That includes point-to-point purchases, French recruits, or horses in training, such as all the dispersal sales that we've had this year. And as you can see from the table, Gordon Elliott has retained his top spot with just under £6 million spent this year. Obviously, that's a massive amount of money, but it does include his Coldwell construction spend, where he, retained a fair few horses of his own. But as you can see, he's bought 35 horses, and they average out at 170 grand per horse. So there's a very high caliber of horse going into the Gordon Elliott yard, as you'd expect. Paul Nicholls, again, is another one who has had to spend some money from the dispersal sales, where his owner, Chris Giles, obviously sold a lot of his horses. So Paul has spent a fair amount of money retaining the services of those horses. Plus, obviously, he got Coldwell Potter from the Coldwell sale as well, so that will increase him. Willie Mullins in at 2.3 million this year. A lot of his French recruits this season have actually come through public auctions rather than private purchases, so that is obviously increasing his total. I've converted all the euro spend into pounds, of course. But I think some of the names on the list that will, cause a bit more surprise, obviously Harry Durham up in 6th place there, and Warren Greatrix in 8th place is probably another one that will catch the eye. Nicky Henderson falling down to 10th is one that probably will surprise a few people, but I think he has been doing a lot more private business this time around compared to previous years, so obviously that will lower him down the table. If we switch up the table then just to look at the spend of the top 20, comparing last year's spend to this year's spend, as you can see, there are some big movers, Notably Nicky Henderson, who's gone down by 2 million, but as I said, that is mainly because he's utilising private purchases a lot more. One of the big increases, though, as you can see, is Harry Durham, who's up by nearly 1.1 million. And obviously Paul Nicholls up by 2.4 million, as I stated, from the Chris Giles dispersal mainly. But that is your sales analysis. Obviously, all the ins and outs are something I love looking at each year. You can see the type of investment that are going in these yards. But one caveat I will say is across the board, there has been a lot of private purchases in point-to-points this season. A lot of horses being withdrawn from the sales or just not sold at the sales and then going privately afterwards. So that is something to bear in mind when looking at the spend this season.
Thanks very much, Jake, and looking forward to GG Banker, aka Adam, who'll be coming on in a future episode to talk all things French recruits. And with the French recruits in mind, Dan, I know you've got one to follow.
Yeah, we're going to get some really interesting insight from Adam, I think, on that episode ahead. I think he's promised to almost look a bit under the radar as well. So potentially some of the lesser names you may not have heard about as much in the last few months, Adam will be covering in great detail there. So definitely keep an eye on that. There'll be some ones that you probably may not have heard all that much about. So definitely worth keeping an eye on. But the one I have my eye on is a horse called Canesborg, now owned by JP McManus, trained by Gordon Elliott. Won 2 AQPS races towards the end of last year, including a grade 3 over an extended 1 mile and 2. So he's got plenty of pace, clearly. Showed a really good attitude on that occasion as well. Since been bought for €355,000. He's by Dr. Dino out of a really good French mare who achieved a rating of in the mid-130s, or equivalent rating of in the mid-130s over here. The type you could probably see maybe setting an early standard in the 2 mile novice hurdling division, clearly, because he's got a lot of pace. Gordon will tend to have him out a bit earlier than the likes of Willie as well. So keep an eye out for him, especially in some of these early season maiden hurdles. He could well be graded standard.
Okay, good stuff. And Jake, have you got one for us as well?
I do, yeah. I've had to flick through the list. There's many I could have chosen, but I've gone with Caroline Bamboo. She's a half sister to a 3 times grade 2 AQPS bumper winner, Imagine Bamboo. And she's also from the family of the more familiar Ferro Bamboo, obviously, who we know from Venetia Williams' yard. So she's quite well bred. And if you look her up on the Racing Post, you'll see that she's only got 1 start to her name when she was finishing second in a grade 2 AQPS bumper at St. Cloud last September. But if you actually go on the France Gallup website, there is a lot more runs to her name. She's had 5 starts in all. She won a maiden, she's won a grade 2, and she's finished second in a grade 3, grade 2, and grade 1, all at bumper level. So she's got some brilliant form in the book. The horse that beat her in both the grade 2 and the grade 1 is a horse called Kamara Dehuz, and he is a bit of a freak. He's now a dual grade 1 winner, and he's won over hurdles since beating Caroline Bamboo as well. So it looks like a really strong piece of form. And this 4-year-old filly has now moved to Willie Mullins in the colours of JP McManus. And this season's obviously going to be going hurdling, and the Mares Novice division will be for her. So she's going to be one of these benefactors of being able to run in, graded and listed Mares Novice hurdles without having to pick up a penalty now for the Mares Novice hurdle final. So I think that the Mares Novice market as it stands currently is not going to be as it seems when, by the time we get to January, February type time.
Yeah, really interesting stuff. I mean, you guys know so much about this sport of ours. It's wonderful to listen to you, really. Let's get your views on a couple of point-to-point recruits as well. Jake, start with you for this.
Yeah, there's a few rare broodmares where, everything that they full turns to gold. And namely, you've got a couple like Matney, who, has produced the likes of Mighty Potter and Brighter Days Ahead. And they've, she's produced a new sales stopper over the summer as well. But the other one is Sway, who you might remember produced 2 Cheltenham Festival winners this year in I Know the Way You're Thinking and Limerick Place. So she has produced a new foal this year. He's now a 4-year-old going to be turning 5, and that's the way I'm thinking, and I'm really looking forward to him this year. He's already won a point-to-point when trained by Derek O'Connor, who's got an operation now where he trains for JP, before they go under rules in the National Hunt Spear. But he's now joined Gavin Cromwell, and in his point-to-point though, he was a beautiful winner. It was a ready 3-length success over a horse who's since moved to Willie Mullins for Simon Monier and Isaac Swade as well. So that's the way I'm thinking. The latest off the I'm the Way You're Thinking production line, and I think that he's going to be a really good horse. Obviously, in time he's going to come into his own over fences, but there's plenty of races to be won with him in the meantime.
Okay, Jake, I like the way you're thinking.
No,
Let's get
jeez.
let's get let's get
The
the thought.
lowest of hanging fruit there. The lowest of hanging fruit. It wasn't even hanging, it was on the floor. That is,
I'm not here
I
to provide.
expect better.
I'm not here to provide any concise jumps analysis, just ridiculous puns and jokes.
And my God, you do a good job of it.
And Dan, what about you, point to point wise?
Yes, I mean, there's so many we could go with here. Obviously, every season you'll hear about the next hot point to pointer, then there's plenty of them. One I thought was a bit interesting and may go slightly under the radar as maybe not owned by one of the leading players in the game, a horse called Captain Speech, who now with Henry de Bromhead won his sold point to point in really good style, really good time that day as well. And those in behind are doing quite a bit to suggest that Captain Speech is well above average. The runner-up was bought for 92,000. After that is now with Dan Skelton, who obviously knows the time of day when it comes to his purchases, and that horse is out of a full sister to Oscar Whiskey, so very well bred as well. The third won his next point to point and did so pretty well. Been bought for 125 grand since now of Ollie Murphy. So all pretty good signs. Mark Scallon said of the Captain's Speech, probably the best horse he's had through his operation. He's not had maybe some standout names, but the likes of Western Diego, Strawfan Jack, the Doyen Chief, all been going through that system in recent years. So it says a fair bit about Captain's Speech. I expect him to make up into a well above average, probably novice hurdler, I suspect. But yeah, want to keep an eye on for the Henry de Bromhead team.
Okay, good stuff. Thanks very much both for those angles there for both French horses and point-to-point recruits. So now it's time to move on to trainers to follow. And I actually vaguely recall me saying last year, I think I put up Oliver Greenland, Josh Guerriero. I can't actually remember, but I think that was my trainer to follow. And I'm afraid to say I'm going to go with the same again. Because I think I think they had a great season last year. They unfurled and produced a few really nice types in the making. They did particularly well with their handicap chases, a wonderful strike rate throughout the season. And I think they're only going to grow and grow. They're attracting owners all the time. And they have a few horses coming into this season now who sort of petered down the edge of the handicap towards the end and ran out of form, who've actually dropped to some nice marks. So I'm hoping they're going to have a really good season again. Of course, the likes of Iroko showed they can really train at the top level too. And I'm really excited to see what they can do once again. And they're still, very much in their embryonic stages as a partnership, but I think they're really talented. So looking forward to seeing Oliver Green and Josh Guerriero. They're my trainers to follow. Dan, what about you?
So I've got a couple. They couldn't really be more different. Literally, they could not be on further sides of the scale. So the first one will be a fairly familiar name, and people may think this is a bit farcical, but I think Nicky Henderson's maybe being already looked as like a trainer on the decline in some circles. Obviously, last year had its challenges for obvious reasons. See the Cheltenham fiasco, Constitution Hill, losing Shishkin, a lot of difficult events to overcome. But you look at the record, it was nearly identical to the season before. So last season, he had 90 winners from 440 runners. The previous season, he had 90 winners from 439 runners. So remarkably consistent despite all the difficulties. And I bought the horses in training brochure from Nicky Henderson. And looking through it, I was actually just quite impressed by the range of horses he has that I think have still got an awful amount of upside. And crucially, I think where the likes of maybe a Paul Nicholls doesn't have that absolute nailed-on stable star anymore. Obviously, Braban's game maybe not the force he was. Nicky Henderson isn't lacking in that department. Obviously, John Bon is probably the best chaser in Britain. Constitution Hill is back and hopefully back to what we know he can be. Sergino looks hugely exciting. And then slightly below that level, you think of some of the novice hurdlers they had last year, and like Jericho de Repene, obviously Iberico Laws going chasing, Django Bay, Peaky Boy, Shana Bob. There's a lot of really exciting chasing prospects there. I think JP's invested a lot into the yard again, a lot of unraced types there. I think Ollie Harris has got some really interesting types. And there's a lot of unraced 4-year-olds in the yard, which I think, by all accounts, he received 10 well-bred 4-year-olds from Ireland, all owned by Paul Holden. I think they've got every incentive to go well first time out. So I think it could be a bit of a renaissance year for the Nicky Henderson team. I think I just look through that stable and see a lot of horses with a lot of potential. And then on the other side of the scale, Cian Collins over in Ireland. Obviously, I think he's a trainer to keep an eye on. He's only 26 years old, and I'm getting to that stage now when I'm having to talk about people in this sport who are still younger than me now. I don't like it. It doesn't feel right. So I'm talking about a 26-year-old trainer who's on the rise. I can feel the wrinkles developing on my forehead. as I speak. But he's coming from the Gordon Elliott production line, really was there for many years. You may well know him from success with likes of Ephinoc Fizz and Mighty Tom in recent seasons. But he's been getting a couple of decent types recently from sales. Churchstow and Warrior, one of the most recent ones, obviously brought back to finish fourth in a Kerry National, having had all sorts of issues. So I think he'll start to get a better type of horse in time, and I think he's one just to keep on the right side of, especially he doesn't mind travelling over to Britain either. So when you see his name on potentially some of these lesser cards in the UK, definitely keep an eye on him because he's a very capable trainer.
Okay, Nicky Henderson and Kean Collins. I didn't think those would be the two coming out of Dan's mouth. There we go. Jake, what about you? Trainers to follow for this season?
Yeah, Dan's got pockets deeper than I buying the horses and trainers brochure for Nicky Henderson this year. Bloody
15 quid well spent.
Yeah. Quite right.
When I look at my trainers to follow, I like to look at two main factors: improvement year on year in results and investment going into the yard for the year ahead. And Harry Durham pretty much comes out on top on both counts, really. Obviously, during the 22-23 season, he only saddled 57 runners, although he still managed to get 14 winners from that because he only started training in January. But last year it was his first full season, and he absolutely smashed it out of the park. He saddled 44 winners from 179 runners, 25% strike rate across the whole season. Just absolutely ridiculous. Climbed 74 places in the Trainers' Championship to 28th place as well for that. So obviously owners are taking note as well because the investment is duly coming. Harry Durham has received 1.36 million worth of public investment at public auctions this year. 12 horses, so on average around 113k a horse. So they're obviously good caliber of horses coming into the yard as well. And it puts him sixth on the overall table of investment, which I showed you earlier. So, clearly he's got the signals of intent to be, firing in more winners this year. And he's also got plenty of firepower existing already. He's got Ascending Lark, Queensbury Boy, Queen's Gamble, some exciting horses. And they're adding to the new recruits. Imagine the horse he got from Gordon Elliott, which, will be an interesting handicapper for the year. And some pointers as well, Coqueran and Mondu Boys. So I think he's going to be elevated to the next level this season.
Yeah, and I was lucky enough to go to his yard actually last season. It's a proper setup, and he's got the Nichols bug. Really, you can tell when you go there. He's learned from the maestro because he's so kind of on it with everything that he does. I think it's a really good shot. Okay, on to something slightly different. Horses to forget. We did quite well last year, didn't we, in this little segment? Because Jake, you had a dream to share. He was beaten on his only start at 11-8 on favourites. So I think you've got a 3-year flawless record in that now.
Yeah, I've not had a single horse win a race yet. So
who were the previous two? Who were the two before Dream to Share? Wasn't one? Oh, who was the Nichols Juvenile? That was one of them, wasn't it?
No, it was Bob Ollinger the year before.
All right.
And I completely forgotten the first year. I'll have to edit that in.
It was that forgetful. It was awesome. And Dan, you had Johnny who looked an absolute superstar when he won on debut and then has subsequently been beaten 4 times.
I mean, my whole thing with him was he was such a short price for Cheltenham Festival races, having won one god-awful bumper. And for connections who haven't had a runner in a Cheltenham Festival novice hurdle since like 10 years ago, it was actually impressive he got there. But I mean, again, if you're looking at level stakes return, I'm going to count that as a success.
Yeah, definitely. I had to put forward Blood Destiny after weapon in the Triumph Hurdle 2 years ago, and he ran okay in a couple of races, but I don't think he really looked a proper kind of natural chaser really all through the season. I knew he won a couple of times, but I'm going to go with that as a win in my book for a horse to forget. This season, I'll start. I'm going to go with Brave Man's Game. Dan, you mentioned him actually as a horse you might be waning, not quite the horse he was. I'm going to put forward a statement now. I don't think he'll ever win another race.
I love this.
Yeah, and I know
Bridle Man's Game. Join me, bully. Yeah, join me.
You're gonna hate me, but I think that Gold Cup where he finished second behind Galopin Des Champs absolutely finished him, and he's just not been the same horse since. If Paul Nicholls decides to go the Charlie Hall route and then straight to the King George, or indeed just go straight to the King George, I think that'll give him a better chance of winning a race this season because I think he needs to be fresher now. That mid-run of the Betfair Chase last season, I don't think really helped him at all. That said, though, I think his power is on the wane. And for all that I said a couple of years ago that he's actually the best jumper in training, and I think he was at that stage, last year he looked a completely different horse in terms of the natural fencing ability he once showed. He was hitting a few, he was long at a couple, short at a few. Just didn't look to have the same confidence. And I'd be a little bit worried about his supporters throughout this campaign. So he'd be my horse to forget for this season. Okay, and Dan, what's your horse to forget for 2024 to 25?
I went back and forth on this one a few times. I had a couple I was tempted by, but I didn't think they were potentially high profile enough to merit being in here. So I'm going to go with one who's going to be divisive. I'm going to go with Jasmine DeVoe, obviously champion bumper winner from last season, 100th festival winner for Willie Mullins. So a lot of accolades going his way. Obviously came around the outside on that occasion, whereas Jalon Dudery and Romeo Coolio stayed on the inside. Looked very impressive. I'm just not convinced he's going to be the top echelon of novice hurdlers this season. I think you go, remember the build up to the champion bumper last year. Obviously, I think Willie Mullins ran 8. I swear you were getting a whisper every other day for one of the other ones as like being the main fancy. Obviously, ultimately, Patrick chose Jasmine DeVoe and clearly made the right decision. But I don't think there was an awful lot amount in what they were seeing between them. And I'm not sure it was the greatest of champion bumpers we'll ever see either. Obviously, I know, Punchestown, he bombed out. That's not really the main reason for why I'm choosing him as a horse to forget, because I think a lot of horses disappointed Punchestown at the end of the season. Obviously, a lot have come out of that champion bumper and ran poorly, but I just think there'll be others that improve past him. He's been described as very narrow, very short, quite small. And the fact that he's favourite for the Supreme and the Gallaghers now, I just think there's a likelihood that some of the bumper horses that maybe had a less high-profile campaigning may improve past him. And then that's not even considering the likes of the French horses and your Irish pointers who are going to come in, obviously make waves in novice hurdles as well. So I just don't think he'll be at the top of the novice hurdle division come the end of the season, and bearing in mind his market position for a lot of the big races at Cheltenham. I'm going to take a chance. He'll win a maiden hurdle, and he may well be very good, but I think his position in the market warrants taking him on.
Yeah, I like that, Dan. It's quite a bold call, but I'm behind you on that, actually. You make a really good reasoning behind it as well. So looking forward to seeing Jasmine DeVoe toil and trouble throughout the season. Jake, what about you for your horse to forget?
Yeah, Dan's so upset with the champion bumper form still that he had to put up the favourite for the winner. It's his horse to forget. So, yes, I am going to try and keep up my unbeaten record with Mystical Power. He's a horse, obviously, who had a really successful campaign last year. I think he exceeded everybody's expectations from starting out on pretty, low key stuff over the summer to, managing to win 2 Grade 1s. But I do remember just looking at him for quite a while in the pre-parade ring, before the Supreme at Cheltenham, and he was a very notably smaller horse than the remainder of his rivals. That immediately makes me nervous for any potential chasing campaign. And if you look at the stats for Galileo, his sire, he's not produced a chaser to record a higher RPR than 146, and 87 horses have been sent chasing by Galileo. So I think he's got some decent stats to overcome if he does go chasing. I think, in all likelihood, he's probably going to stay hurdling though. And that's where I think more issues pop up. Obviously, he enjoyed a fantastic spring picking up those 2 Grade 1s, but I don't think that was a vintage crop of 2-mile novices. He beat Firefox twice. I don't think you're going to be talking about that as champion hurdle form, really, are you? So he's probably likely to start out in the Grade 1 Unibet Morgiano hurdle at Punchestown. If he does go there, he's probably going to take on at least one of State Man or Lottymouth, potentially even both, depending on what Willie has to run at the time. And I just don't think at any point this season he's going to be Willie's first string in any Grade 1, open 2-mile novice hurdles. As also, I don't think he's going to make up into a chaser. I think Mystical Power is my horse to forget, and hopefully he can keep up this unbeaten record.
Any chance we could get him just muddling around in these races and back for a county off like a mark in the mid to high 150s?
Very possible.
It is possible.
He'd make that a mockery, to be honest. And hey, these new novice rules makes it probably more likely, no?
With the rules, that could definitely happen. And if he did end up going to a handicap off a decent mark, then I wouldn't, unconsider him, that's for sure. But
I think Aramon did that.
Yeah.
I think Aramon did that, and he wasn't anywhere near as good. I think ran in like the high 140s in a county and only got done by, it was the other Willie Mullins horse who did him. JP's horse, can't remember. But yeah, he did likewise. So it isn't exactly unprecedented. So,
Saint Ra, wasn't it?
Saint Ra, that was the one who was a blip.
Yeah, exactly. Mystical Power though is rated quite high already, isn't he? Because he's won 2 Grade 1. He's off
154.
Yeah, and that's Irish as well. So you're talking 158 UK. So that is something that you'd have to get down. I don't think the handicap would be too keen to drop him.
He'll definitely need to jump better than he did last year, that's for sure, in open company. If he wants to be a contender in the big level races, he definitely needs to brush that up, that's for sure. Okay, good stuff. Thanks, lads, for that. Horses to forget. Right, moving on to the novice horses to follow, whether it be chasers or hurdlers in graded company, because of course we have got those 2 videos of the handicappers to follow, which if you haven't seen, do go and have a look at. Some real gems hidden in there from both Jake and Dan, and a couple of horses to follow for myself as well. We're going to move on to the graded horses, and I think, Dan, you haven't got anything for this section because, to be honest with you, you have absolutely rinsed the French and point to pointers, so I think you're probably novice horsed out.
I spent my entire summer looking at horses who didn't win for about 9 months. So my research is generally confined to those types. So when it comes to the good horses, I'm a bit thrown out. But I tell you what, I will just throw one in there, or a couple I think will be above average who didn't win last season, because I know not everyone would have read my columns. But the first one is a horse called Tutti Quanti, trained by Paul Nicholls. He'll be a second season novice hurdler. Had a big reputation when he came over from France. They were looking like they may have run him in some of these top juvenile hurdles. Left him alone, so he retains his novice status for this season. A lot of good talk coming out that he's probably going to be quite a high-ranking novice hurdler this season. So keep an eye on him. And another one for a much lesser yard for Katie Price's yard, a horse called Peacenik. Had one of their best bumper performers ever. A yard you'd never associate with bumper runners ever. I think prior to Peacenik, only one of the 26 bumper debutants had placed. And that was a horse who actually had loads of bumper experience in Ireland anyway. So it was a really impressive run to do what he did. He finished behind Tishan, I think it was, at Exeter on his bumper debut. Really strong staying type. I think will eventually make up into a cracking staying novice chaser, but one for a lesser yards who might just go under the radar a bit because of his connections.
Okay, excellent stuff, Dan. Yeah, 2 to keep an eye on there for Mr. Overall. I'm going to put forward a couple as well. The first one being Jubilee Alpha, Paul Nicholls' mare, who finished second in the Grade 2 bumper at Aintree for mares last season behind a very impressive winner. She didn't get the clearest of runs that day, wouldn't have beaten the eventual victor, but it was still a really promising effort on just her second start. She won her first bumper outing. She travelled so strongly into that race, and before she got that luckless passage, she looked to have every chance of winning the race. She was a lot smaller than the winner. She's quite a daintily built type. Wouldn't be the biggest in the world, but does have a frame to build into. Novice hurdling will be the aim this season, and she's got a very speedily bred pedigree. So 2 miles at sharp tracks, I think, is going to really suit her. And I think there'll be plenty more to come from her, given the fact that she's only had 2 starts. And I think she'll make it to a decent hurdler for Paul Nicholls, that's for sure. And the other one that I want to put forward is Gidley Park. I'm sure plenty of you will remember him from last season, looking very exciting in novice hurdles. Eventually a little bit underwhelming at Cheltenham, but I think there's been loads more to come from him over fences. He was bought as a chaser. Harry Fry's always said that he's going to be a proper chaser in the making. So given the abundance of talent that he showed last season on most of his starts, he's pretty versatile in terms of ground as well, and in terms of track. I think he's going to be one to keep an eye on. Hopefully he'll make a lovely shape over a fence and be a proper chaser to follow for the rest of the season. And of course, he's British, so hopefully he can take on the Irish and show him what he's all about. Jake, what about you?
Yeah, I agree with that one. I'm looking forward to seeing him too. I'm going to mention one really quickly. That's Kopek de Board. Obviously, it's quite an obvious horse, but kind of looking down the same lines as Dan did in his horses to forget section. I think I'm going to be hard pressed to be backing champion bumper horses this season in the novice hurdles. And Kopek de Board didn't run in the champion bumper, but he absolutely bolted up at Fairy House. Looks like a very exciting animal for Willie Mullins. So I'm excited to see him as well as the French horses coming across. But one this side of the RSC that I will be very excited to see on his debut, it will come to no surprise to avid viewers of the Jump Show, and that is Celtic Dino for Sam Thomas. I can't wait to see him over hurdles this year. Obviously, he was a dual bumper winner last season, bolted up at Ascot in November, and the second and third it won since. Finished third in the listed bumper behind Let It Rain, who's quite prominent in the mares novice hurdle market. And then he wasn't at its best after a 121-day break where he finished his season by winning at Wincanton, kind of scrambled home a little bit that day after a long absence, but that should give him plenty more experience. And if he doesn't quite make the graded level this season, I could see him being one of those novice handicap hurdles at Sandown at the end of the season, either the EBF or the one on the final day. So he's a horse that's very much on my radar.
This is why I love the jump season, because we already planning for the last day at Sandown. Literally haven't had Chepstow yet. We're already planning for the jumps finale day. What a game.
You got to love it.
Plan ahead.
Yeah, it's
You
tremendous.
don't get this on the flat because you're already thinking about, oh, yeah, you've got this nice big meeting in 3 weeks' time. No, screw that. I want to know what's going to win in April. Now. Tell me now.
You'll be retired to Stud by October on the flat.
Too right.
Jake, I'm with you on Cultadino. Looks a lovely horse, doesn't he? He's a proper good-looking type as well. So looking forward to see what we can do this season. Lads, then that brings us to the end of our seasonal preview. We'll be back next week for the preview of Chepstow. So actually proper racing to enjoy and look at. And the season really does kick off properly in Wales, as it always does. So very much looking forward to that. Please do like and subscribe to the Jump Show. It really does help us out. And of course, if you want to enter the competition for 2 tickets that are being given away by Unibet for the Saturday of Chepstow's seasonal opener, all you have to do is like this video, subscribe to us, and comment "Jumps are back" to get involved. Right, I think that brings us to the end of our seasonal preview. Thanks to Jake and Dan, as always. Hope you all enjoyed it, and we'll see you again next week for a Chepstow preview.
What even was that accent at the end?